In a theater, it happened that a fire started offstage. The clown came out to tell the audience. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He told them again, and they became still more hilarious. This is the way, I suppose, the world will be destroyed, amid the universal hilarity of wits and wags who think it is all a joke. Hello, I'm Søren Kierkegaard. I was born in Copenhagen into a wealthy family in 1813. My parents had 7 children, but only I and my brother survived. From a young age, I became very interested in the works of Plato, specifically with the character and person of Socrates, and I went on to write my dissertation on Socratic irony. Socrates was the first and greatest philosopher. I admire him so because he lived authentically. He practiced exactly what he taught, even at the cost of his own life. You see, some people in Athens strongly resisted Socrates' teachings about virtue. They hated him for teaching the truth. Some did not perceive Socrates to be a suitable moral authority, and they rejected his message because they thought that Socrates was telling them what they must do or think. Ironically, Socrates' message for the people of Athens was accepted when he did not tell others that they needed to seek virtue. Instead of preaching, Socrates often played the fool and invited others to teach him how to be virtuous. He did this by asking questions that encouraged self-reflection and authenticity, a teaching practice we now call the Socratic method. I noticed my countrymen and women also resisted living an authentic life. For example, the great majority of my fellow Danes thought themselves to be Christians because they believed Christian doctrine and they went to church once a year. However, these same people refused to live in accordance with the truth that they apparently believe. For example, they knew Christians should give to the poor, but they never gave to the poor themselves. When I initially told others that Christianity requires much more than simply going to church, that it requires transformation as a person, they scoffed at me and rejected my message. Like Socrates, I came to understand that no one willingly accepts any uncomfortable truth, like that they are a false Christian, unless they imagine that they discovered the truth themselves. So I had to find a way to help my readers engage in self-reflection. They needed to re-examine their personal commitments to Christianity and discover for themselves what Christianity truly required of them. To do so, I followed the example of Socrates. Although he was a great teacher, Socrates knew that he could not present himself as the moral authority. Instead, he had to remove himself from his message if the message was going to be accepted. So I decided to trick my fellow Danes into accepting the truth and living an authentic life. That is, I inspired them to re-examine their commitments to Christianity to help them discover for themselves what Christianity truly requires by hiding my authorship. They rightly would not listen to me, Søren Kierkegaard, who they know lacks the moral authority to tell them how to live. But they might listen to strangers like Victor Eremita, Judge Wilhelm, or Johannes Climacus, my pseudonyms. I was very committed to the deception. Since I came from a wealthy family, I didn't need to work. So I spent my days walking around town conversing with anyone I happened to meet. This gave everyone the impression that I was foolishly wasting my inheritance with idle chatter. However, as soon as the day ended, I would rush home and furiously write all night. I continued to write pamphlets, articles, and books under my own name as I published my pseudonymous works, just to throw off suspicion. My secret books and the questions they asked captured my readers' attention. They began to re-examine their own lives and to figure out their own relation to Christianity. They started to question their own assumptions, to question themselves and the very culture in which they lived. The goal of my writing was not to change people's minds about a variety of topics, but to engage with all in such a way that they would become transformed. I think that it is more important for us to try to live the right life than it is for us to spend hours debating which version of the right life is actually correct. That is not to say that there isn't an objectively true answer to the question, for there is. Rather, I think it is more important to actively engage with questions that are focused on the way that humans should live and exist. My message is simple. Live well, live authentically. Now, This is where I need you. You create your relationship with the truth. You bring your subjectivity into connection with what is. You turn inward and engage in self-reflection, and you become authentic.
How can I ever acquire enough evidence to make myself know that it's real?
Well, lies. They feel real when we don't examine them, right? The only way to know what's real, what's true, is to invest ourselves in it. It's only when we start to live authentically that we realize that certain beliefs that we hold are actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really know what's true until you feel it, right? Until then, you just think and act within the parameters that are given.
I guess, yeah.
So, how do we grasp the truth?
Well, we just came from gathering the,
Think about it. How do you grasp the truth? What is truth? How are you relating to it?
Is that the truth?
You actually are forming your relationship with the truth right now. This is your first lesson in becoming authentic. Stay calm.
Whoa. So, figuring out what the truth means to me is part of what the truth is.
So, what is authenticity? How does one live authentically? Let me tell you a little story. There was once a man who was put away in an insane asylum. One day he escapes. He knows that if he's caught, he'll be taken right back to the asylum. So he decides that he must convince everyone that he is not insane. He does this by making sure that he speaks only the truth. To remind himself to do so, he puts a ball in the tail of his coat. And every time he takes a step and it bounces off his rear, he exclaims, "Boom, the earth is round. Boom, the earth is round." Now, is not the crazy man speaking the truth? The earth is round. But this man's problem is that while he is saying something that is true, he has the wrong relationship to the truth. Knowing the shape of the earth is not what makes us sane, and thinking that it does is clear evidence of a poor mental state. This poor man possesses what I call the objective truth, knowledge of the actual state of things, but he lacks the subjective truth, the proper relationship to that state of things. Objective truths can be understood as facts about the world. They are primarily claims that are true regardless of the human who makes them. For instance, mathematical truths are objective truths. No matter who you are, 2 + 2 = 4. Most of the time when we use the word truth, we mean the objective truth. The subjective truth, on the other hand, is a bit harder to understand since I define the term subjective a little differently than it's commonly defined today. The subjective truth refers to an individual's correct relationship with the objective truth. That is, the subjective truth is how we relate to the objective truth. For example, imagine that there was a philosophy professor who was teaching ethics. This professor impressed on his students the importance of fairness and justice every day. He constantly argued that justice was the most important thing in existence, and the students began to be convinced. Imagine then that one day, a student sees this professor grading papers and learns that the professor assigns grades arbitrarily, giving the best grades to the tallest students and the worst grades to the shortest students. What injustice! The student would consider the professor a scoundrel, and rightfully so. What we have here is a professor who possesses the objective truth, that justice is of the utmost importance. Yet, they lack the subjective truth, for they do not apply that principle to their own life. My fellow Danes are in a very similar situation with Christianity. They possess what I think is the objective truth, that Christ is indeed the Son of God. But they lack the subjective truth, the proper relationship to the claim that Christ is the Son of God. Likewise, they all agree that Christianity tells Christians to give to the poor, and yet they never give to the poor. They know the objective truth, but they have the wrong relationship to that truth. Like the man in the asylum, they too walk around boasting of objective truths despite entirely lacking the proper relationship to those truths. My task then is not to teach about the objective truth of Christianity, as many other philosophers do, but to help others transform into people who have the proper subjective approach. My audience does not need to be told that they should not lie. They need to transform into individuals who are filled with honesty. Philosophy should not merely teach us objective truths, it should also change who we are. My fellow Danes did not understand the importance of the subjective truth, and thus I endeavored to teach them by turning them inward and propelling them to engage in self-reflection. I could only do this by using pseudonyms and trying to emulate my hero, Socrates. Thus, we must always return to Socrates. Socrates chose to die rather than to live inauthentically. Such was his love for philosophy. My life's work was aimed at promoting authenticity in my readers. We must learn to live authentic lives, for the inauthentic life is not worth living.